The Keeper of Hours. Eleanor stood outside the small house she had rented. The town was quiet, far from the noise of the city she used to live in. She had left everything behind: her job, her friends, her old life. After Michael's death, nothing felt the same. She needed a place to start again, somewhere that didn't remind her of him. The house was simple, with white walls and a red roof. It sat at the edge of town, where the streets were narrow and lined with trees. Eleanor unpacked slowly, trying to fill the empty spaces in the house and in her heart. One day, as she explored the town, she found a small shop tucked away at the end of a street. The sign above the door read, "Adrian's Clock Shop." It looked old, with dusty windows and a wooden door that creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, the shop smelled of wood and metal. Shelves were filled with clocks of every size and shape. Tall grandfather clocks, small pocket watches, and elegant wall clocks. At the back of the shop, a man stood at a workbench, his hands carefully fixing a delicate watch.
"Hello,"
Eleanor said softly. The man looked up. He was in his 40s, with dark hair touched with grey. His eyes were sharp but kind, and his hands moved with care as if each clock was a treasure.
"Good afternoon,"
he replied.
"I'm Adrian. Can I help you?"
Eleanor hesitated. She wasn't sure why she had come inside.
"I was just looking."
She said. But as she glanced around, her eyes fell on a small clock on the counter. It looked old, like the one Michael had given her years ago. Adrian noticed her interest.
"That's a special one,"
he said.
"Every clock here has a story."
Eleanor smiled faintly.
"I have one too, but it's broken."
"Bring it in,"
Adrian said.
"I'll take a look."
The next day, Eleanor brought the clock to Adrian's shop. It was small and golden, with a delicate bird carved into the back. It was the last thing Michael had given her before he died. She had kept it, even though it no longer worked. Adrian took the clock and examined it carefully. His fingers moved over the tiny details, and his expression grew thoughtful.
"This clock is special,"
he said quietly.
"It's not just broken. It's waiting."
Eleanor frowned.
"Waiting for what?"
Adrian looked at her, his eyes serious.
"For the right moment."
She didn't understand what he meant, but there was something comforting about his words.
"Come back tomorrow,"
Adrian said.
"I'll see what I can do."
Eleanor left the shop, feeling lighter than she had in months. She didn't know why, but she trusted Adrian. When Eleanor returned to the shop, Adrian handed her the clock. It looked the same, but when she wound it, the ticking sound was soft and steady, like a heartbeat.
"Take it home,"
Adrian said.
"and listen."
That night, Eleanor sat in her quiet house, holding the clock. As it ticked, she felt a strange sensation, a warmth spreading through her chest. She closed her eyes and suddenly she was back in the park where Michael had proposed to her. The memory was vivid, as if she were really there. She could feel the sunlight on her skin, hear the sound of birds, and see Michael's smile as he held her hand. When she opened her eyes, tears streamed down her face. The clock had brought the memory to life, but it also reminded her of what she had lost. The next day, she went back to Adrian's shop.
What did you do to the clock?
She asked.
I didn't do anything.
Adrian said.
The clock holds your memories. All I did was help it find its rhythm again.
Eleanor began visiting the shop more often, bringing other clocks for Adrian to fix. Each time, the memories became clearer. Some were happy, like her first date with Michael. Others were painful, like the day she found out he was gone. Adrian listened patiently as Eleanor shared her memories. He never pushed her to talk, but his quiet presence made it easier for her to open up. One day, Eleanor asked,
Why do you fix clocks?
Adrian paused, his hand stilling over a pocket watch.
Because time has a way of healing, even when it seems impossible.
Eleanor nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Adrian was hiding something. He never spoke about his own life, and he never left the shop. One evening, Eleanor stayed late at the shop. As Adrian worked, she noticed a strange clock on the wall. Its hands didn't move in the usual way. They ticked backward.
What's that clock?
She asked. Adrian glanced at it and hesitated.
It's special.
He said. Eleanor frowned.
Does it fix memories too?
Adrian looked at her, his expression unreadable.
No, that one doesn't fix anything. It rewrites.
Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the backward-moving clock. Its silent, steady ticking seemed to echo in her mind long after she had left Adrian's shop. The next morning, she returned earlier than usual. Adrian was at his workbench, carefully repairing a delicate watch. He glanced up when she walked in, but didn't say anything. Eleanor didn't waste time.
You said the clock rewrites. What does that mean?
Adrian sighed, setting his tools down.
Some clocks hold memories, Eleanor. Others hold choices.
Choices.
She repeated, her brow furrowing. Adrian stood and walked to the backward, moving clock.
This clock doesn't take you back to a memory. It lets you change what happened.
Eleanor stared at him, her heart racing.
You mean it can change the past?
Adrian nodded slowly.
But it comes with a cost. Every time someone uses it, something is taken from them. Something they value deeply.
Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine.
Have you used it?
Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his workbench, his shoulders tense. That night, Eleanor lay awake, the weight of Adrian's words pressing on her. What would she change if she could? The answer came to her instantly. Michael. If she could save him, wouldn't it be worth any cost? The next day, she confronted Adrian.
I want to use the clock.
Adrian froze, his hands hovering over a tiny gear. Slowly, he turned to face her.
You don't understand what you're asking for.
Then explain it to me.
Eleanor said firmly. Adrian sighed and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same.
The clock rewrites events, but it doesn't erase their consequences. Time finds a way to balance itself. If you save someone, you may lose someone else. If you undo pain, it may return in another form.
Eleanor's resolve faltered, but only for a moment.
I've already lost everything, Adrian. I'm willing to take the risk.
Adrian studied her for a long time. Finally, he said,
If you truly want this, meet me here tomorrow night. But think carefully, Eleanor. Once the clock turns back, there's no going back.
The following night, Eleanor arrived at the shop. It was quiet, the town asleep. Adrian was waiting for her, the backward-moving clock in his hands.
Are you sure?
He asked one last time. Eleanor nodded. Adrian placed the clock on the counter and wound it carefully. The ticking grew louder, filling the room.
Focus on the moment you wanted to change.
He said.
But remember, the clock will take something from you. You won't know what until it's too late.
Eleanor closed her eyes, her thoughts racing to the day of Michael's accident. She remembered the sound of the phone call, the shock of hearing the words, "He's gone." As the clock ticked backward, the air around her seemed to shift. The room grew colder, and she felt a strange pulling sensation, as if the past was reaching out to her. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in her old apartment. It was the morning of the accident. Michael was there, smiling at her as he buttoned his coat.
Eleanor, I'll be back in a few hours,
he said. She felt a lump in her throat.
Michael, wait.
She said, grabbing his arm.
What's wrong?
He asked, his brow furrowing. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't tell him about the accident. It would sound impossible.
Just stay home today, please.
Michael hesitated, then smiled.
All right, if it means that much to you.
Eleanor felt a wave of relief. She had done it. She had changed the past. The next morning, Eleanor woke up in her rented house. At first, she felt disoriented. Had it all been a dream? But when she checked her phone, she saw a message from Michael.
Good morning, love. Can't wait to see you tonight.
Her heart soared. He was alive. But as the day went on, something felt off. She noticed small things at first. A favorite book missing from her shelf, a photograph she couldn't find. Then she realized she couldn't remember the name of her childhood best friend. Panicking, she returned to Adrian's shop.
Something's wrong.
She said.
I can't remember things.
Adrian's face was grim.
The clock took pieces of your memories, Eleanor. That was the cost.
But why? Why my memories?
Because time doesn't give without taking.
Adrian said softly.
The more you use the clock, the more it will take.
Eleanor's chest tightened.
Is there a way to undo it?
Adrian shook his head.
The only way to stop the clock's influence is to accept the past as it is. If you try to keep changing it, you'll lose everything.
Eleanor left the shop, her mind racing. Michael was alive, but at what cost? Could she live with losing pieces of herself to keep him? As days turned into weeks, Eleanor's memories continued to fade. She struggled to hold on to the life she had saved, but the person she was before felt like a stranger. One evening, she found herself back at the shop. Adrian was waiting for her, as if he had known she would come.
I can't keep doing this,
She said.
but I can't lose him either.
Adrian's expression softened.
Sometimes love means letting go. The past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. You have to decide what matters more: the life you had or the person you are now.
Eleanor looked at the backward-moving clock. It had given her Michael, but it had taken so much in return. With trembling hands, she picked up the clock.
Thank you for everything.
She said to Adrian. Then, before she could change her mind, she smashed the clock against the floor. The moment the clock shattered, a strange stillness filled the room. Eleanor felt as if the air had been sucked away, leaving only silence. The shards of the clock gleamed faintly on the floor, as though holding the remnants of its power. Adrian moved quickly, his face pale.
You shouldn't have done that.
What happens now?
Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Adrian knelt, carefully gathering the pieces.
The clock's destruction breaks its hold over you. But time doesn't take kindly to being undone. There will be consequences.
Eleanor's heart sank.
What kind of consequences?
Adrian didn't answer. He only looked at her with a mix of sorrow and understanding. The next morning, Eleanor woke to an unfamiliar world. Her house looked the same, but subtle differences stood out. The colors of her curtains, the arrangement of her furniture. Small, almost imperceptible changes that made her feel uneasy. When she checked her phone, there were no messages from Michael. Her heart raced as she dialed his number, only to be met with a message saying the line was disconnected. Panicking, she drove to their old apartment. The landlord opened the door, a puzzled look on his face.
Michael, no one by that name has ever lived here,
He said. Eleanor's chest tightened. Had she undone him entirely? Desperate for answers, Eleanor returned to Adrian's shop.
Adrian,
She said, tears streaming down her face.
Michael is gone. It's like he never existed.
Adrian was solemn.
The clock didn't just take your memories, Eleanor. When you broke it, you erased the changes it made, including Michael's survival.
Eleanor felt the weight of his words, a crushing emptiness.
So he's really gone?
Yes,
Adrian said softly.
but this is the timeline where you can truly heal. You're free now.
Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind reeling. She had wanted so desperately to hold on to Michael, but in doing so, she had nearly lost herself. Now, she had nothing, but also, perhaps, a chance to start over. Over the following days, Eleanor spent more time at Adrian's shop, seeking solace in his quiet presence. One evening, as they worked side by side repairing a clock, she finally asked the question that had been haunting her.
Why do you stay here, Adrian? What's keeping you bound to this place?
Adrian hesitated, then sighed.
A long time ago, I made a mistake. I used the clock to change something I shouldn't have.
What did you change?
Adrian's gaze grew distant.
I tried to save someone I loved, but instead of saving her, I trapped myself here. The clock's power comes at a cost, Eleanor. I've been paying it for centuries.
Eleanor stared at him in disbelief.
Centuries?
He nodded.
Every time I help someone, I lose a part of myself, memories, feelings, pieces of my soul. I've stayed because this shop is all I have left of who I once was.
Eleanor felt a pang of sorrow for him.
Is there a way to free you?
Adrian looked at her, a faint smile on his lips.
Perhaps, but it's not something I've had the courage to face.
As weeks turned into months, Eleanor found herself slowly rebuilding her life. She opened a small cafe next to Adrian's shop, a cozy place where people could gather and share their stories. Adrian became a constant presence in her life. Though he remained a mystery, their bond grew stronger, built on shared pain and mutual understanding. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of the shop, Eleanor looked at Adrian and said,
You've given so much to help others. Don't you think it's time someone helped you?
Adrian looked at her, his expression unreadable.
Perhaps.
He said softly. Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Adrian's words. She began researching the origins of the clock and its curse, determined to find a way to free him. Her search led her to an old book in the town library, one that spoke of a clockmaker who had angered the gods by trying to manipulate time. The curse could only be broken if someone willingly sacrificed their connection to the past, severing all ties to what they had lost. Eleanor realized what it meant. Adrian would have to let go of the memories he had clung to for centuries. The memories of the woman he had loved and lost. When she told Adrian, he was silent for a long time.
If I let go of her, I won't remember why I stayed all these years.
He said. Eleanor reached for his hand.
You'll have a chance to live again, Adrian. To create new memories, new connections. Isn't that worth it?
With Eleanor's help, Adrian prepared to face the clock one last time. They placed the shattered pieces on the workbench, and Adrian whispered a quiet prayer. As he let go of his past, a bright light filled the room, and the pieces of the clock dissolved into dust. Adrian collapsed, and Eleanor caught him, tears streaming down her face. When he woke, Adrian looked at her with confusion.
Who are you?
Eleanor smiled through her tears.
A friend.
A year later, Eleanor's cafe had become a beloved part of the community. One day, a man walked in, his eyes scanning the room. It was Adrian. He didn't remember her, but when their eyes met, something flickered. An unspoken connection, a feeling of familiarity. Eleanor smiled.
Welcome. Can I get you a coffee?
Adrian hesitated, then smiled back.
I'd like that.
As they sat together, the world seemed to pause just for a moment. And in that moment, Eleanor felt a spark of hope. Proof that even when time takes everything, it still leaves room for new beginnings. Thank you for watching. Keep learning and practicing every day. Learn English through stories. Practice speaking with shadowing. Stay with us at Deep into English and improve your English step by step. Remember, easy English stories can help you grow. See you in the next video.